The Moodle workshop activity can be used in an online course, obviously, or it can also be used in face-to-face classes. And what the workshop activity does is it allows students to submit any type of submission that they can normally submit to Moodle, like a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet or a link to a video or images, like an infographic, anything like that. Or, as you know, you can also have your students type directly into a text editor in Moodle, so it will allow that type of a submission. Once the student's work is submitted, in the Moodle the thing that makes Moodle Workshop different from any other assignment submission is once the work is submitted, the students have the ability to assess either their own work and or one of their peers' work based on a form or a rubric that the instructor creates. So you can require your students to turn something in and then do a self-assessment, or turn something in and assess each other, which is a really great way for them to think critically about what they're doing at each stage of the research project or group project that you're having them do. At the end of the workshop activity, the students get 2 grades. One for their submission and one for the quality of their assessment of their peers' submissions or the quality of their assessment of their own work. And both of the grades are recorded in the gradebook. So the students they're kind of forced to be thoughtful about the work that they've turned in. And I really like that because this activity in Moodle requires the students not to just turn something in and forget about it. They're not able to do that. They turn it in and then they have to keep thinking about it, keep analyzing it, reflect on what they did well or what they didn't do well, learn a little bit for themselves about their own work, be self-critical, which is a really great skill for them to develop. Okay, how could you use the Moodle workshop activity? At what point of the process of group work should you use it? You can use the Moodle workshop activity at any point when the students are working on individual contributions to a group assignment. So in other words, if you have divided your group assignment up into discrete things that the students need to turn in, you could have a workshop activity for them to assess each one of those stages. If you're doing a research paper in your class, you may have a workshop activity for them to analyze their thesis, and then another one for them to analyze their annotated bibliography, and another one for them to analyze a rough draft of their research project. You may encourage them to do a workshop activity for their sources and have them turn in one of their sources and analyze it using the CRAP test. The CRAP test, if you're not familiar with it, CRAP stands for currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. So a student would turn in an article that they were considering using as part of their research for their research paper, and they'd have to analyze it and say, is this a good article for my research paper? Is it current? Is the material in it relevant to my research paper? Is the author of the research paper that of the source that I'm considering using, is he or she really an authority? In other words, is this published in a peer-reviewed journal, that sort of thing? Is the source accurate? And what was the purpose of the source? Was it published in a peer-reviewed journal, or is the purpose of this source just to teach somebody, like a webinar like this one? Or was it actually even worse? Was it entertainment? So that CRAP test is a really good way to get students to analyze their sources and think about whether they're using the type of sources that you want them to use in their research paper. And having them do that through the Moodle workshop activity might be a really great way to use this activity. And then, obviously, you can use the Moodle workshop activity for the final product of research projects and problem-based learning assignments, creative writing, anything like that. Okay, what type of feedback can you get from the Moodle workshop activity? You can do anything, a large range of activities, anything from simple mechanical feedback. Does the submission meet some sort of strictly defined criteria? Like, for example, does it have typographical errors? Does it have grammar errors? Does it have spelling errors? Does it have the proper number of sources? Things like that, purely mechanical things. Or you can ask your students to provide a critical analysis of the submission, answering questions like, what's the best aspect of this submission? What's the most interesting or surprising part of the submission and why? What's the best or least developed point and why? Things like that. Or you could use the Moodle workshop activity to provide inspiration for continuing research. You could have the students look at a submission and then answer questions like, what questions remain in your mind after reading this submission? What points remain unclear? Where is there a potential to develop the research further? Things like that. Okay, let's look at how the Moodle workshop activity works. Moodle workshop activity looks complicated. If you just went into Moodle and added it as an activity, you would, without any background knowledge, you'd probably look at it and say, wow, can't figure this out, forget it, I give up. It looks complicated until you understand how it works. So let me give you a review of its different phases and how grading works in it, and then I'll actually go over to Moodle and show you a couple of examples of the workshop activities. I have 4 of them set up. Okay, there are 5 phases of the Moodle workshop activity. The first one is the setup phase. This is where you go to add an activity or resource and you add the workshop activity. In this setup phase, you can add a description of the workshop. You can add the instructions for submissions, and you set up the assessment form for the students to do their self-assessment or their peer assessment. If you choose to, you can include sample submissions and sample assessments of those submissions so the students can see this is an example of a good submission, or this is an example of a good assessment of a submission. And when you're in the setup phase, the students can neither submit nor assess. They see the activity there, but when they click on it, it just says it's not ready for you yet. The next phase of the Moodle workshop activity, you have added all of that stuff and you push the activity to the submission phase. At this point, the students can submit their work. It looks just like any other activity submission that you've seen in Moodle. And they can submit their work either in the inline text editor or as file attachments. And as the submissions come in, the instructor can set up the instructions for the assessment, and the instructor can assign who is going to assess which submissions. So in other words, if you've got 6 people in your class, student 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and student 1 has submitted their work, then you can say, okay, student 2 and 3 is going to assess student 1. So that's what you would be doing as the instructor in the submission phase. Once all the assessment allocations are made, the instructor would push the workshop activity to the assessment phase. In the assessment phase, the students can see who they're supposed to assess, and they can see the submission that they're supposed to assess. They read it and they assess it based on the form that you have created. As the instructor in this phase, if you would also like to assess students' work, that's when you're able to do it. So you can add your own assessment based on your own form. Now, there are 4 different types of assessments that the student or the instructor can do, and they're called accumulative, comment, number of errors, or rubric. Accumulative assessments allow the students or the instructor to give a number of points to the assessment. So in other words, in an accumulative assessment, there might be 5 questions that the instructor has the students answer, and the students can give a number of points that the instructor defines to demonstrate how well or how poorly they think that their peers' submission meets up to the standards that the professor has defined. So accumulative gives points. For comment assessments, there are no points, nothing but comments. So the instructor would ask a question like, what's the most interesting point in this submission? And the assessor, the student assessor, would have to answer that question with a comment. For a number of errors assessment, the instructor would ask questions like, does this submission contain numerous grammatical errors or excessive grammatical errors maybe? And the student assessor would answer yes or no, that type of thing. And then rubric is exactly what you expect it to be. You create a rubric and the students have to rate the assessment or rate the submission based on the rubric that you've created. And we'll look at each one of those types of assessments when we move over into Moodle. Once the students have completed the assessments of their peers' submission, then the instructor pushes the workshop activity into the grading phase. In the grading phase, the instructor reviews the submissions and the peer assessments. And at this point, the instructor can make his or her own comments, and the instructor can override grading if they want to. During this phase, the students are waiting to see what their grade is going to be. They can neither submit nor can they assess during this phase, and they can't yet see their grades. And then finally, once the instructor has reviewed the grades and agreed that they're all okay or made any changes that he or she wants to make, then the instructor pushes the activity into the closed phase. And when the activity is in the closed phase, that is when the students can see their grades in the gradebook. Okay, so those are the phases of a Moodle workshop activity. Remember, in the closed phase, the students are going to see a grade for their submission, and they're going to see a grade for their assessment of their peers' submissions. So let's look for a second at how those grades are determined. First of all, let's look at the submission grade. Suppose that you've got a class, and in the class you've got John, Sam, and Harry. John turns in a submission, and it is going to be assessed by Sam and Harry and the instructor. Sam's submission is going to be assessed by John and Harry and the instructor. And Harry's submission is going to be assessed by John and Sam and the instructor. So, let's suppose that it is a number of errors assessment, and if the submission gets 4 yeses, yes, and what that means is yes, an answer like yes, there are no grammatical errors, yes, there are no spelling errors, yes, it has the proper number of sources, that sort of thing. If John gets 4 yeses, he'll get a 100. If he gets 3 yeses, he'll get a 75. 2 yeses, he'll get a 50. 1 yes, he'll get a 25. And no yeses, he'll get a 0. So Sam does his assessment, and he gives John a 100%. He says John has included everything that he's supposed to. Harry does his assessment, and he says, well, John didn't include the first item that he was supposed to, but he did include all the others. So Harry gives John a 75. And the instructor does his assessment, and he agrees with Harry. He says that John did not include the first aspect of the assignment, but he did do the other 3. So how is John's submission grade going to be determined then? It is going to be an average of Sam's assessment, Harry's assessment, and the instructor's assessment. So John is going to get an 83%. Now, the instructor can override that. The instructor can say, my grade is weighted more than Sam's and Harry's assessment, so I'm going to bring this grade down to whatever I want it to. But if you don't do anything to alter it, that is how the submission grade is going to be determined. Okay, how then is the assessment grade going to be determined? The assessment grade of John's submission, that grade is going to be given to Harry and Sam. Harry and Sam's assessments of John's work are going to also be graded. And how is that going to be done? The assessment grade is determined by a comparison with what the machine, what the computer determines to be the best assessment. And how does the computer determine what is the best assessment? It looks at all the assessments that are given, and it tries to figure out what is the most commonly given assessment. So in this instance, where one person gave an assessment of yes, 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 and the other two people gave an assessment of no, yes, 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 the best assessment is going to be no, yes, yes, yes. And so when Sam and Harry's assessment grades are determined, Harry gave an assessment of no, yes, yes, yes. His assessment exactly matches what has been determined to be the best assessment. Therefore, he is going to have a higher assessment grade than Sam, who missed one of the 4 categories for the best assessment. So he's going to get a lower assessment grade. Now, how low his assessment grade is going to fall depends on how the instructor has configured the assessment grading to work. You have 5 options as an instructor. You can set assessment grading to be very lax, lax, fair, strict, and very strict. If you set it to very strict, the assessment grade for somebody who did not align with the best assessment is going to be much lower than if you set the assessment grade to very lax.